Yeah, so this is somehow very different to the other two talks. This is more technical and more an update on what is going on with the standard METS. Although I work for the German National Library, I'm here on behalf of the METS editorial board, and there are other members of the METS editorial board here in the room. So later on, when there are questions, they can probably be helpful for this discussion. So in principle, I guess, or at least I hope you already heard about METS, Metadata Encoding and Transmission Standard. It's maintained by an editorial board with people from all over the world. And in principle, it's an XML schema-based specification for encoding the documents together with the metadata, so to say. There are different sections in this in the METS document: descriptive metadata, administrative metadata, structural metadata, and the actual content files that are included or listed at least. METS is especially used now, I would say, in the preservation community within preservation systems for the information packages, SIPs, AIPs, DIPs. So this is basically the background. Now I will give you a short overview of the new things and the motivation for METS 2. I won't go into introduction of METS in principle, so you should know METS 1 to some point to understand the changes. This is just a short talk and not an introductory tutorial for METS. So METS 1, many of you maybe use this already in your systems, and it has been stable for many years now. And on the other hand, there were several issues in the past, especially related to the usage of Xlink. And when we talked about how we can address these issues, we thought, well, if we have to make something not backward compatible, then maybe maybe we can talk about generally making it simpler, more flexible, and improving overall the consistency of the whole METS, as it is very old and was originally from a special context of digitization and developed to one of the main used standards in the preservation community. It makes sense to rethink the structure in this purposes. But don't panic, METS 1 will still be available and supported, so there's no rush in changing your existing systems after METS 2 will be introduced and publicly available. So the changes. As I said, we started with Xlink, and in the METS 1 there is basically all the links are Xlink href links, and we now in METS 2 decided to use instead a new attribute logref, and this is not just for URIs. You can use any string for this, so it's more flexible while giving up the dependencies on the well-defined or the defined Xlink attribute. Then, talking about attributes, there are several enumerated lists in the METS 1 standard. This is also somehow a burden for development of the standard, as these fixed lists need to be enhanced over the time with new values and so on, and that's quite difficult to maintain. So we decided that for the several attributes in the standard, there are no more enumerated lists. There might be recommendations on the values, but it's no longer part of the standard. And then another experience we have from the actual usage of METS, there are certain sections that were never used or never really used after a few contexts in the beginning. And these are basically struct, link, and behavior section. Both were removed from METS 2. So the basic sections were also, where the metadata sections are somehow the main parts. And we decided to make it more consistent with the file section in the regards that we have now only one MD section, a metadata section with metadata group, just like in the file section, and a metadata element instead of the different named metadata sections, descriptive metadata section, administrative section, technical metadata, rights metadata, source metadata, digital prof metadata. All this is still possible, but it's now in the same syntax. This looks like this. You see, it still has all the elements and the sections from METS 1, but now in a new syntax. And this is one way to do it. This is the way you would directly transfer things from METS 2 to METS 1 to METS 2. But it's more flexible. You could do it different ways, the structure, if you want to. So the new metadata section is basically a flexible way to structure your different metadata elements and different sections. This might be like in the past, but you could have your own usages. And then we also try to resolve some problems that were in the past with nested file groups, and that's why we decided for METS 2 that it's now no longer allowed to have more than one level of file group within a file section, and on the other hand, the element file is now could be now directly under file section. Before it had to be in file group. For the structural section, we decided that struct map is still, of course, relevant and very important, but it's now in its own structural sections to make it, to align it to the metadata section, to the file section, now in the structural section. In the past, struct map was always called in the METS documentation as heart of the document, and this is still not wrong, but it's no longer a mandatory element. In the past, struct map was actually the only mandatory element in METS. We decided there's no real reason to maintain this as mandatory alone. So we said it's like the same the same with any other element. It's not mandatory. This looks like this. On the left side, you have the old first level elements of a METS document, and as you see for version 2, it looks simpler. It's on the other hand a bit more consistent in the naming: METS header, metadata section, file section, structural section. In principle, everything is still there, besides the struct, link, and behavior sec as a separate entity, but you could do similar things within in the other sections if you still want to do it. So this is somehow our approach. We came up in the METS editorial board. It was not yet published, this new version, METS 2. You are the first to hear it publicly. There's the paper. You can read in the paper of this presentation what is in more detail the different points. We plan to release a white paper in the upcoming weeks or month, and of course a new XML schema for this. And then we also have to think about the METS profile schema. As you know, it's possible to register and to make METS profiles for special use cases, and this will be then adapted to METS 2. If you want to join the discussion about METS 2 and maybe tell us what you think is wrong in this approach or should be different, please join the METS mailing list. You can use this link or this QR code to get to the registration for the METS mailing list. And in principle, if you want to know more about METS and what you can do with METS and get different example files and so on of METS 1 at that time, you can go to our METS webpage hosted by the Library of Congress. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that update, Tobias. I've got a couple of questions. But first, we'll open up to the audience if anybody has any questions immediately. Our lonely developer, is that you? Yeah. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Daniel from National Library of Norway. I had a question since I see you made the version 2 incompatible, or not backwards compatible with version 1. I was wondering if there are any plans or thoughts about maybe changing from using XML to some other format like JSON or similar, since we experienced that the support for XML is steadily dropping from languages like Java, dropped it from their main library, so we have to use external tools for that. And it's also a bit harder standard to use or get others to use, which aren't used to METS and similar languages. So we needed to develop a JSON-based schema to get them to deliver the information we then need to transform into METS, into XML.
Well, we relatively early in the discussion decided to stay with, in principle, with METS in the way it was used in the past. So such a big change to completely drop XML was not discussed. But I think XML still has its advantages and is still widely used. So maybe this might be a problem in the future, but I'm not sure it's actually a problem for now. But you're right, this is probably something maybe coming up in the future.
Any more questions for Tobias?
Yes, hello. I'm Juha Chandar. I'm from the Finnish Preservation Services, and I was wondering, when you simplify the METS, do you expect the XML file to be a bit smaller, reducing overhead also in some way compared to METS 1?
What was the question? I'm not sure.
Will the METS 2 file, the XML file, be a bit smaller if you have simplified the structure compared to METS 1?
Yeah, I guess I hope that these changes will lead to smaller XML to a certain degree, because some elements are gone, and you can have a more straightforward metadata section structure, but I think there won't be that big reductions of the overall format. That's still up to how you use METS for your use case, as METS is so flexible. It was already in METS 1, and it's maybe even more flexible with this with these changes, but in principle you could have a very small METS file because nothing is mandatory. So it's really up to the use case on how big your METS file will become in your usage. So I think the basic structure is now very simple. So in principle, a file could be very small.
Got another question. Thank you, Carly. Quick round of applause for Carly, who's running our microphone. Carly, we've got another question behind you. Just 2 rows this time. Cheers.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Ian from Canada. I have a question. I think it's too early to ask. So in the document that you're going to release, we're going to map, there was a mapping from version 1 to version 2. I think maybe it's too early to ask the question. The second question, I believe METS is a container. So that's include the descriptive metadata, admin metadata, but you didn't mention the preservation metadata. Maybe my understanding is not correct. So you include admin, descriptive, technical metadata, and the content file, but you didn't mention the preservation file. So,
okay, for the first question, we plan to have in the white paper two example rows, so to say, with METS 1 and METS 2, so you can see how something is done or was done in METS 1 and how it will be done in METS 2. So it's not a mapping in the sense of an automatic mapping or something, but the white paper will describe the changes with examples on how it was done in METS 1 and how it will be done in METS 2. So, and also, I guess we will come up with updated versions of some example files we have already on the METS webpage with the METS 2, so then you can see the mapping of how it will be done. And for the other question, in the past, you had preservation metadata mostly within the technical metadata section of the old sections. But preservation metadata includes many different aspects. If you look at premise, you see premise as lots of different aspects, and that's why there is a guideline how to use premise in METS, and there are different ways you can do this. You can put everything in the technical metadata section. You could split up parts of it in several sections. So there's not only one way to put preservation metadata in a METS file. Regarding the changes in 2, there's not really a change because everything that is described in these guidelines, how to use premise within METS, could also be done with this new descriptive, this new sections, as you still can use the same subsections as before. So you could also introduce, it's now possible, to a metadata section preservation if you want to, and make a new way to include this. So you could do this as in METS 1 with different variations, or you could even use a new metadata use preservation if you want to.
Could I ask a question as a civilian? We have thousands of METS files created by Archivematica in our repository. Do we need to worry about anything or think ahead of what action we might need to take for our METS 1?
So, as I said, you don't have to worry about that everything will be gone regarding METS 1. So METS 1 will still be there. There will be still an XML schema. If you link to the XML schema at the Library of Congress webpage, it will still be there.
Right.
So there's nothing that will be changed overnight. So everything won't work anymore. No, that's not the case. So it's just an offer. There will be now METS 2 as other way to do this.
Okay.
And so you could think about changing your system to support METS 2 or convert existing things to METS 1 records to METS 2. But this is just an option, and maybe in the future there will be different tools to help you with this. We are still in an early phase. It's not yet published, so I guess there will be ways to do this.
Right. So I don't need to worry yet.